Welcome, and let me just tell you a little bit about what we're going to do today. We did the introductions, so you can go ahead and turn this on if you haven't already. Basically, I'm going to walk you through very quickly, because you've all heard this before, but it is such a critical part of your CV because it's what you have to evidence in your CV. I'm going to walk you through the criteria and a little bit about dossier preparation. And then Jenna, who I am delighted to have join us today, Jenna went up for promotion last year, had to go through this whole process, so it's all still pretty fresh. And she's going to talk about, and was promoted to professor because of her stellar CV and phenomenal record. And so Jenna's going to walk you through her actual CV and the kinds of things to give you a concrete example. And we hope you brought your own CV so that you can work through your CV at the same time. And then hopefully we're going to have some time for questions and discussion. Any questions before we get going? Okay. Any of you who've sat through one of these with me before, by all means, jump in at any point in time. Do not feel like you have to hold your questions.
I wasn't sure, although it did say UBC CV, but I wasn't sure, I thought we were supposed to be going to the common CV, so I wasn't sure, whether that was going to be covered or whether that's a whole separate thing.
We're basically using the UBC CV, and we're going to work our way through it. And there are certain parts of it that are they're all part of the common CV, but trying to do the common CV online is a bit of a nightmare. So I personally wouldn't use it. Jenna, I don't know if you tried to use it. It's everybody who uses it just pulls their hair out.
I did when it first came out and pulled my hair out, and so then stopped.
Okay.
So it actually makes more sense to use what you have as your regular CV and then just build on it, I think.
And in fact, I used it and then I actually downloaded it into a Word document and went from there. And so it really wasn't as flexible as just working on it.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions before we get going?
Can I just ask one question?
Yeah.
In terms of tenure and promotion, you need the UBC CV though, is that correct?
You do.
Okay.
The only time you don't is if you're coming in on a new appointment, and they'll allow you to use the CV from your institution. But once you're here and you're working your way through the system, you must use the UBC CV. And people hate it, but having reviewed 1,200 CVs when I was on SAC over 6 years, there are a lot worse. I can tell you that. There's many that are worse. Okay, so you need to do it. Let's go over the criteria quickly because these are the things that need to be represented in your CV for the professoriate stream: research, service, and teaching. All of that is covered in your CV and in very specific sections. We know for a fact that research and teaching is particularly important when it comes to tenure and promotion, that you can have a good service record, but being well liked is not going to get you tenure and promotion. The other pieces have to be there. In terms of the associate professor, you need to get familiar with, and you can download, the collective agreement. This, whatever anybody else says, this is actually your contract. It is this information in terms of the collective agreement on which you will be assessed. It's the information that's sent out to external referees, and they basically have to walk through and say, okay, have you met that criteria from their perspective? So you need to know the criteria, and when you listen to everybody else, don't listen to them. Go back to the collective agreement. That's your contract. Because there's lots of people who will say you kind of need to do this and you kind of need to do that. Go back to the collective agreement. The other thing is that there will be some resources we'll note, and it's on your handout. There's the professorate path and the educational leadership path, and it's online through human resources. And we used to refer to this constantly on senior appointments because it highlights the criteria in each of the areas. So it's well worth going back. It says the professorate stream, criteria for tenure and promotion, and then it is the educational leadership stream, criteria for tenure and promotion. These words in each of these boxes are taken directly out of the collective agreement. So it's a great thing to have handy to say, okay, have I used words like sustained scholarly productivity? These are the things that we're going to be looking for. That's what your referees will look for. That's what they'll be looking for as the file goes forward. So know what the criteria are for your particular rank. I'm not going to go over them all. You have this here, other than to simply say you're talking successful teaching, and that is subsumed under the ability also to direct graduate students. That goes under your teaching. Sustained and productive scholarly activity, and you're going to see that I've highlighted the word sustained and productive because that is what people look for when they're assessing your file. And in any case, when you go forward, they're looking from your last promotion. What kind of sustained scholarly productivity is evidenced there since your last promotion or since your first appointment? Your willingness to participate and your participation in the affairs of the department. For those of you who are tenure track, willingness is as important as participating. You can get overloaded with service commitments. The fact that you're willing to do them is as important as the fact that you're doing them. So don't get too overloaded and be very judicious. Associate professor, you can go up what they call early. That's before your 7 years. You do not go up for tenure, you go up for promotion. If promotion is granted, tenure comes automatically. You can only be considered once at UBC for tenure, once. And if you are denied, you get a terminal year. Okay, for professor, teaching quality, again, has to be high quality. Again, the sustained and productive scholarly activity, and that's input and output. It is not enough to just get grants. You have to then turn those into knowledge translation in terms of publications. Both ends are important. You have to meet appropriate standards of excellence and have wide recognition at this level. This is where international referees can be particularly helpful depending on your area of expertise. They need to know that there's an impact in terms of your work. You have to have attained distinction, so people need to know your work, which is why a choice of referees is really important. They need to be able to say, oh yeah, I read so-and-so's work, I use that in my classroom, or whatever. And you have to have participated significantly in academic and professional affairs, and this is service outside of the university as well. Professional affairs meaning your particular profession. So outside of just UBC, what are you doing in your particular profession and discipline? We need to bring you up to the table here. And
Thank you. Sorry.
okay, the EL stream, again, everything is the same except educational leadership, and there is a heavier emphasis on excellence in teaching. Criteria for senior instructor, again, collective agreement 304, excellence in teaching. It's expected, it cannot be mediocre teaching, it needs to be excellent. Demonstrated educational leadership, they're still trying to figure out how best to evidence that. The educational leadership workshop that we had last month spoke to that, and they're getting much better in the SAC guide at trying to articulate evidence for educational leadership. Involvement in curriculum development and innovation, teaching and learning initiatives, and staying abreast of current developments. That's the expectation at the level for senior instructor. For professor of teaching, you'll see we went from excellence to outstanding achievement in teaching, distinction in the field. When you're going up for senior instructor, you don't have to have referees external to UBC. However, for professor of teaching, you do. There is an expectation that there will be referees from outside of the institution, and they should be able to speak to your educational leadership, curriculum development, teaching. And then again, the word sustained comes in again. There's going to be gaps for all of us in our careers, but really over the period of time from when you first start to when you go up for your first promotion, the period of time from your second promotion to your next promotion, that's the period where there needs to be evidence that there's been sustained contributions. Okay? So, this is something people often don't know. There's an assumption that that file that you put together at the very beginning, including the letter you write if you're tenure track, that follows your file. It does not. So what happens is at the department standing committee, there will be the letter that you write, which also is the letter that explains your case, and your referee selection, the 4 referees that you're putting forward. Your CV, journal descriptions, but Jenna and I are going to talk about how you can put those inside your CV, which often is a better way to do this. Selected publications, usually 3. SPROT, that's the summary peer review of teaching. It's something that's used throughout the university. Apparently, there's more emphasis on a more comprehensive review that's starting to happen here in the Faculty of Education. For those of you in the EL stream, it's your teaching dossier, which is more extensive. Collaboration letters, these are only if you've done a lot of collaboration in terms of your research or your educational leadership with other professionals in the field, and the head can ask for those letters. You cannot. Okay? And then your referees letters. That's the DSPC. Then the external referees, what do they receive? Your CV, big, your selected publications, your teaching dossier, if you are in the EL stream. Professoriate, you need to know the primary emphasis for your referees is not on your teaching, it's not on your service, although they may comment on those things. They are really looking at your scholarly productivity. All right? That's their primary focus. Some of them will comment on teaching, but they're not given enough information to know a whole lot about your teaching unless you're in the EL stream and they get your teaching dossier. When it comes to service, at the level of promotion to professor, they will sometimes say, this person's really made a big contribution, a service contribution to the profession, broadly speaking. They may make reference to that, but most of the emphasis is looking at your contributions in terms of scholarly productivity, sustained productivity. In the EL stream, they're looking at teaching effectiveness because it's such an important part of this stream, and they're looking at evidence of educational leadership. Yes?
So I just want to go back to the first one. I think I'm missing something. So letters, we have to write a letter. So we have to write a letter. Is there some template for that, or is there something around that, or is it just?
There's not really a template.
It's like a cover letter that you would submit
Yeah.
here, enclosed in this package, and you know, that kind of describes.
And it's a really great opportunity to present your case and put it forward, because often a head will take some of what's written in your letter to incorporate in his or her letter that goes forward with his or her recommendation. So it's a really important piece at this level. Problem is it doesn't follow that. It's just at this level. So
How long is that letter typically?
a couple of pages plus the referees.
Max, yeah, 2 pages max.
And if you have a case where you're pulling together a couple of different threads, it's really helpful to be able to explain how they come together. Because you can't assume that DSPC members are going to know that. You can't assume the head's going to know that.
Sorry, is it Metro Education Program? Or...
No.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
So just one more question about that then?
Yeah.
So the SPROT, what's the SPROT then?
That's a summary peer review of teaching. In our case, we're not using a formal SPROT approach that's been adopted by other faculties, and that was very much recommended by people in this faculty. But what it will include is your student peer evaluations, a summary of that. It will include your peer teaching evaluations, and basically a summary of that is what most heads put forward.
So do we
Is that
compile
correct,
or
gentlemen?
do we compile that, or?
No.
Okay, so we don't have to worry about that one.
You don't have to
that's
worry
right.
about that, but what you do have to worry about is that if you're going to plan to go up for promotion, so let's say next year, and you're going to put your dossier forward, you need to make sure that you give people a heads up that you need to have a peer review done, because you need a current peer review before you put your dossier up. Otherwise, what's happening is we're rushing around trying to get something done, and so often people are going on leave. You know, I'm taking my sabbatical, I'm not teaching for another year. Well, this is a problem, Houston. You know, we need to do that in advance.
Can
Okay?
I just ask, is there,
Yeah.
a similar kind of question, the teaching dossier, is there a prescribed format for that, or it's just, like, is it, you know, like, this is really clear, you have to follow this, so I'm just wondering for your teaching dossier.
Look in the SAT guide, and it will
Okay.
tell you the pieces that tend to be in there, but I don't think there's any hard and fast rules from department to department.
There seems to be a template floating around, though. People do use a template.
Yeah, and that comes, I think,
Scores on
from...
7 for a number
Yeah.
of different set categories.
Yeah. I think we really need to do a better job of formalizing that in the Faculty of
There's a
Education.
publicly available dossier, portfolio by Wendy Carr.
Ah, good to know.
Online. I could send you the URL.
Oh, that would be great.
It's
And
great.
anybody who wants it, I can have Kathleen send that out. Great. Okay. Faculty Personnel Committee, what happens then? You have all this stuff floating around. Well, what happens by the time it gets to the Faculty Personnel Committee, your CV, you're going to see this is the constant. This follows you through the whole process. That will include your journal descriptions either as a separate piece or within your CV. The selected publications, interestingly enough, I spoke with Bly about that. Typically, they don't get forwarded to the faculty committee in other faculties, but it tends to vary in this faculty, depending on whether the head forwards them to the committee or not. So they may or may not be forwarded. Your referee letters, critical. The head's letter, by then it's a head's recommendation letter, which will also indicate the vote at the DSPC level and an explanation for both the positive and the negative votes. And that's included in the head's letter as well as his or her recommendation based on all of that. And then teaching evaluations, again, the summary for the professoriate stream and the dossier for the EL stream. Okay? So that's what goes to the faculty level. Then you're going to see a few things fall off. CV goes to SAC. Referees' letters go to SAC. The dean's letter goes to SAC. The head's letter goes to SAC. The summary of your teaching goes to SAC, or the dossier in the EL stream. That's it. No publications. None of the other bits up to this point follow this file to senior appointments, because the assumption at SAC is that people, the 20 professors from the various faculties, do not have content expertise to be able to assess your pieces of work. So the reliance on the referees' letters is big. And in fact, most of us, when we sat on SAC, would go to those first. Then we look at the head's letter. Then we look at the dean's letter. And then we go to the all-important CV and follow that through very carefully. Okay?
Description of the external referees goes forward to SAC?
Sometimes, not always.
Not always. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Description of the external referees can go in the head's letter.
Typically, it will go in the head's letter, and the head will explain why each referee was selected. So that's why it doesn't tend to follow the file as a separate piece. It's usually included in the head's letter, and a rationale for each. And if there are any negative comments in the referees' letters, they're addressed in the head's letter as well, in terms of how the committee, the DSPC, looked at those, weighed them, and made a determination accordingly. There used to be a myth that if you had 4 referees' letters and one was negative, it was the kiss of death. That is not necessarily true. So you just need to know that. And in fact, you also need to know that if there is a negative recommendation at any of these levels, you get a chance to look at a redacted set of referee letters. You get a chance to look at the redacted letter from the head or the dean, and you get a chance to respond in writing. And I have to say, when it gets up to senior appointments, we really want to know from the candidate their reactions to a negative recommendation. And there have been times, I can say unequivocally, where there have been negative recommendations that after hearing what the candidate said, SAC voted unanimously in favor. So your perspective on your case is tremendously important. Okay, you also need to know that you can supplement your file. So you get your CV and you send all this forward and you start the process, and then you get a big grant. You supplement that. You typically, once the file, as long as the file is still in the faculty, it can go to the head who can pass it on. If it has already left the faculty, then basically you send it to the dean's office and they send it on to faculty relations, who then add it to your file, which will be online, and SAC will be reviewing it, as will the president eventually, once a recommendation is made. You get a new publication, supplement your file. don't repeat things in your supplements. So don't assume that you have to send a new supplement with everything that's happened since you put your first dossier forward. Only submit those things that are new since your last supplement. Okay? Otherwise, it gets tremendously confusing. And we spend way too much time trying to figure out, is this new or is this, how many? Okay? So you know you can do that. And make sure you date those supplements. That helps enormously. Trying to figure out, oh, so back in December this happened. Ah, they got another one of these in January, da 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 da. Okay? Questions? Okay. Do we want to talk about this or later?
Yeah, no, go ahead. I'm going to set up over here because I need to scroll.
Okay.
I'm going to get out of the PowerPoint. You talk.
And getting out is really easy. Just go to escape and then the thing is ready to pop up. Okay. When you go online, and they have the samples in the SAT guide of the CVs, and they give you the red writing, the red ink, giving you instructions on what you should or shouldn't do. And I just want to go over a couple of things that actually aren't true. Okay. So, first thing, one of the things it says is pay close attention to detail. When you're putting things in there, like publications, don't put a publication without indicating the page numbers, because then people don't know whether this is a one-page commentary or whether it's a substantive piece of work. Just grab 2 of those and that's right. So make sure, attend to detail. If you are not OCD like I am, this will hurt you, but you must do it. It's really, really important. The other thing, don't duplicate, and you're going to see in the information I gave you, I've highlighted a lot of these points. Don't put things in 3 different places. It will start to seem like you're padding your CV. So put things where they most appropriately belong, whether it's in teaching, research, or service. Okay? They say retain section headings even when there are no entries in that section. For those of you who are tenure-track, that can be really intimidating because there can be big sections that you just have nothing to say. I have seen many files where people just omit them. If they have nothing to say in them, they just don't put them there. So there are no glaring gaps. So it's entirely up to you. It isn't critical. You will not pass or fail a CV test by not having all these sections. Avoid acronyms that are specific to your discipline. Oh, it is so frustrating. You know, start a new job and people are talking in code because they use acronyms. The same thing happens with CVs. So assume that there will be people reading this who are not part of your from your discipline and don't use acronyms. It does say if your CV format doesn't accommodate all the categories that are appropriate for your particular case, then you can add them. Just make sure you add them in places that make sense based on whether they're specific to teaching, research, or educational leadership and service. All right? And it's not always clear-cut, so you can ask the head if you're not sure. If the formatting of the CV regarding tables is problematic, alternative approaches are acceptable, and Jenna's going to give you an example of those. And it says to avoid subjective and self-evaluative comments. What they're really saying is don't say, I'm wonderful and you should believe that, but bloody heck, toot your horn, present your case, present it solidly, because that is going to be the most important vehicle going forward. Jenna.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, so feeling a little vulnerable since you all, I didn't realize there'd be hard copies of my CV, but that's okay. I'm okay. So,
just breathe.
So when I was going up last year, I was fortunate enough, and this is the reason I'm here today, because I feel very indebted to Judith. So I think at Lee's advice, I contacted Judith and said, okay, I'm thinking of going up. Can you have a look at my CV? And she was amazed, you know, basically gave me this presentation one-on-one, which was wonderful. And the biggest thing that I took away from that was really exactly what she was just saying, that the CV is the one thing that carries with you all the way through, that you have control over, that you can, that you should work so that your CV, that you feel confident that it reflects everything about everything you've done in your career. So, and if I look at what my CV looks like before versus after having, you know, that feedback, and she gave me lots of tips and tricks that I'm going to share some of which today. it's very different, and I think, I mean, I got quite obsessed with it, so I incorporated everything Judith said, then I started Googling things and finding, you know, different universities, what do they do, or, you know, lots of people have their CVs online, so I was like, just reading CVs. But it was really interesting, all the different ways you can present information, and there are, you know, you can really maximize the ease of reading and the information that's in it. And so I feel that's probably why I'm actually comfortable sharing, is because I kind of massaged it so much, it felt almost like a little bit of a objective bit of piece of art that I was proud of. Like, wow, I can't believe how much that's, not even the I mean, I'm proud of the content too, but that it was so different in the actual way that it was presented. So I think that's why I'm comfortable sharing it, although I'm not 100% sure.
And that's what made it easier to go forward, is
Yes,
feeling good about it.
that's right, thank you. That was it. So I have to say that once it was in a forum that I really felt like everything was in there, I did have this like, wow, I've done a lot, look at that. And it really took a lot of, like, I did feel much more confident in putting it forward, that at the very least, everything was there. Like, if you didn't want me, then that's fine, but I knew I'd put, there was no stone unturned that wasn't represented in that document. Okay, so I just want to say I'm coming from the professoriate stream, so Judith is going to jump in with PL stream comments as well as clinical things, because I think one of the things I would say is that we have this template, but it is flexible. I mean, it's not, and it is. So I think hopefully you'll see what I've done, how I've kind of made it work for me, and you might come up with ideas for yourself that better match your contributions. So I'm sorry, it's kind of clunky. I'm in a PDF scrolling. So I'm just going to kind of go section by section. Yes.
Just a question, maybe Judith. Sections 8, 9, and 10 are the teaching, research, and service.
Yes.
And clearly the amount that you put in there is flexible, although there are guidelines. And the difference between the research stream and the educational leadership stream is that the research stream doesn't have a teaching dossier that comes with it.
That's correct.
So this is the place that the research stream gets to put in a kind of short statement of teaching philosophy, etc. How much should they use? How much should you go into these introductory sections, especially in 8 and 9?
We're going to go over that, I think, in depth.
Actually, I'll start right there because I'm going to start with this summary. I think in general, so this is a little bit longer than they recommend. I can't remember the characters.
They say 150, but don't panic. You could make that 200, 250. Yeah. Do not make it a page unless you're in the EL stream where you are given the latitude to make it a full page.
So, and the other thing I would say in that section, use it to kind of provide the summary of what you have below you. So as Judith said, use words from the criteria. So talk about how, in this section, how you're teaching those gaps. If you've done program development, anything that isn't noticeably presented in the next section. So I talked here about some of the program development I've done in my role as grad advisor, things like that. The other thing I put in here in all my sections like this is numbers, so a summary of numbers. And the reason I keep them highlighted, I left that in because so in my version, my current version, whatever that you have ongoing that I'm constantly adding to, I leave those highlighted until I'm about to give it for something. And then that is my reminder, oh yeah, you need to update all those numbers too, because I think that's one thing, it's easy for that to get outdated and the rest to be dated. So that's a little thing that I do for myself that I just thought I'd do.
I don't know if this is the right time to ask this question, but one of the reasons why I haven't been using the UBC CV is because I don't know how to reflect my whole trajectory in other universities. You know what I mean? Like, it seems to be very UBC focused, and so I want to highlight that was like totally amazing in other places as well. So
okay, so section 14, other relevant information is where you would want to have that narrative. And truly, narrative is the critical word here. You need to narrate your career and your expertise in each of these sections. And if we have time today, and I don't think we will, but it's something we're going to recommend that you do, is it's very difficult to do that as you're sitting there writing by yourself. So talk to a colleague and speak it to them, and then get them to paraphrase it back to you and take notes. Because that level of objectivity, there will be things that you think make perfect sense about the various pieces of your research, and to someone reading it, they're not going to get it. So by speaking it to another colleague and having them go, wait a minute, I'm not sure what you mean by that, or could you explain this? That will be so very, very useful in terms of being able to write your narrative. And if you spend more time on these sections, you'll be doing yourself a service because they're such important pieces.
Yeah. So in that one and I've scrolled down past it and I'm not super...
Can I jump back to it for just a second?
Yeah, okay, I'll go back.
Because this is teaching folks, it also means graduate supervision.
Right, good point.
So while you can still talk about the awards your graduate students won and those sorts of things later on when you're identifying graduate students, and underneath that you can asterisk and say da-da-da-da-da, mentoring graduate students is an important criteria and a reflection of your teaching. So being able to put that in that section on teaching, that you've attended conferences with your graduate students, you have a lab, you do this, you do that, that can be really helpful because that is teaching.
Yeah, where do they go after? And something I've seen that I haven't incorporated that I think I might is the percent of your publications or conferences that you actually co-author with students. I saw that recently and I really like that because that's often a question like, well, are you publishing with your students? So I think that speaks to that.
So in regards to that, as someone who was at the early stages of my assistant professorship career, I don't do a lot of publication and conferencing presentations with current students. So I think that from what I heard in the previous workshops, that also varies depending on your current rank.
Yes, absolutely.
Opportunity factor.
Yeah. So I think that everything I'm going to say and talk about, it really needs to be, you need to filter it through where you're at in your career, because absolutely things that were relevant for me in ways I presented things going up for full are going to be very different. So, and I'll use that as a segue to the next thing. For example, my teaching, and one of the, this used to be just a long list where I would list the same course over and over and over again for every time I've taught it. So I don't have a huge breadth in the number of courses I've taught. But I've taught them, so it was like, well, why wouldn't you present that in a better way so now it's just the course listed once and then all the times I've taught it in a section. So that might not be relevant for someone coming up. The other thing for this is, so if you have any unexplainable gaps in your teaching, and I should have said that in the narrative. So I was the grad advisor I've been the grad advisor for, in some capacity for 6 years now. So that took up 2 courses that I wasn't teaching. So, but it's still about teaching and that it's supporting grad students and whatnot. So I said something to that effect, I think, in my narrative to really kind of account for why I have fewer courses here.
I'm going to go back to that narrative for just a second. For people who don't have the opportunity to supervise graduate students because you are early in your career, please mention that in your narrative and go out of your way to serve on committees if you can. Because, and in some departments they'll say, we don't allow tenure-track people to supervise graduate students. That's really important information to make sure you put on your CV.
Yeah.
Just a question, did you add course name to that column heading? Because I thought it just said course number.
Yeah, I think I just had the name. Did I have the number? Name or number?
I think on the template it says just course number, but you stuck in name as well.
When Jenna...
Call me crazy.
Well,
I think
it's helpful.
Because I was putting my lens on of, okay, who's going to know what FC 501 is?
I know.
It
gets very, very long in some people's...
But it shouldn't have to, because even though it says here on the template, list every single one no matter what Jenna and I spoke about when I went through hers is I said, this is just more of the same. So if you want to make this readable. So if you've only taught X number of courses and that doesn't look like great breadth, combine them, explain what they are, and then explain in an asterisk underneath, for example, that you are teaching the same course, even though you're willing to teach other courses, you're the only one in your department that has the expertise to teach this particular course, so you're teaching this more often than others, but you're more than willing to teach others. So it's, again, explain.
It's explaining and
Explain.
providing context. Okay, just to jump down to this is, I really liked this section because that was I think a real strength of mine. I've mentored a lot of students who have gone on to be successful, and there was no way I could see that you could include that. But so, and essentially, if you look, I use the STAR system. So I talk about students who were awarded competitive funding, students who completed, who went on to an academic position, and whose dissertation has been published. So a really a nice way to give a lot more information about the kinds of students beyond just a name and what degree they do. And the other piece of this, so you'll see, this probably doesn't look like it does in the guideline. So once this section very quickly, because we supervise so many kinds of students, MED, MA, PhD, EdD for some, so it gets really complicated and looks really, it's hard to ascertain what's really in it, especially if you're not familiar with our faculty or our university. So that's one thing I would suggest. As soon as it becomes relevant, and maybe it's not relevant because you're new and this section isn't that big, but as soon as it becomes so complicated that it's hard to glean information, I would start parsing. And I think that's kind of the message I have throughout this whole thing, is to, when you can't tell what the table is about quickly, then you need to have subtables or make it more. So I've broken it down. I've got it by degree, and then even within that, whether I'm a supervisor or committee member.
And I can't emphasize enough how important that is, because what people often do is they just do this chronology.
Yeah,
and
you want to count, adding into those counts at the top. Sorry.
And you don't know then, reading the CV, was this person on the committee? Were they primary supervisor? Is this research-based? Is this just a major paper? Those sorts of pieces are really important. So by doing the boxes that Jenna has done there, and by indicating clearly, PhDs, primary supervisor, these are my committees that I've been on, doing the same for MAs, then explaining with the MEds that this is not a thesis space, those things are critically important because they will raise questions as you go forward. So you want to make your case as clear as possible.
Yeah, so I distinguish between master's level graduate students that are thesis based, and then after those, masters that were course based, not thesis.
So the caution here, and it's a really, really important caution, keep your damn asterisks straight.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Because what happens
you need to be
if you happen to have asterisks on this page and you don't explain it until the next page?
Totally.
It's lost.
I have to say, I went back and looked through this thing, even like formatting the tables or all that. Like you really do need. And so Judith, you're saying that isn't. I don't know what that says about me. Maybe I do have some OCD.
You're a little OCD like me.
Oh, I thought you said you weren't, but
oh,
yes.
no, big time.
Yeah, so I think, and if you're not, find someone who is. And I mean, I do that with my students if they're submitting stuff. If they can't, if you don't have that capacity to find all those details, then find someone who has that and look through and get that, because that is. And I still see it like
you will miss things.
You miss things, yeah. But when I'm looking at other CVs, it jumps out if there's like typos or even like you've got your conferences and some of them are cited some ways and others are cited. I mean, it's so small, but it is kind of, you notice it. So
Anthony,
Judith, this is a question for you. I think Jenna's has, and I've seen it in other CVs, the designation of supervisor for both PhD students, MA students, and MED students. And just recently, somebody in G&PS questioned this on one of my colleagues' CVs because he was saying supervisor of MEDs, and they were saying that's not the same as supervisor of dissertations or theses. Should the word supervisor be used?
do you know, in our program, we would say program advisor as opposed to supervisor. If indeed there is a research component, then you're advising that student throughout their program. I would use that language instead, because supervisor tends to be research supervisor.
I think the reason I'm only guessing because I don't remember is that because those were the options that SAC, and I was trying to, I knew I was making changes, so I think I was trying to stay within the box as much as possible. But I think that's the question. Yeah.
This is a UBC template. My challenge is in and around graduate students from other previous organisations. And I'm not sure that that fits in well in the other section.
No, I would add another column here that says what unit or university they're from. And I
You
think
can even add a box.
Mine are all here.
And it's fine to do that.
You could have UBC supervised students,
Yes.
non-UBC supervised students. I think, I think you make it work into where the chunks, where the natural breaks fall, that's where you would parse it.
Now, that said, you need to be aware that when your file is being reviewed, they're going to be looking at what you've done primarily since you arrived at UBC. So the fact that there's history is brilliant, because it does speak to the fact that you have the ability to supervise graduate students and you have that success. They want to know what you've done since you've been here. Which is why when people come in and then they quickly go up for promotion, that can be problematic because there isn't enough evidence that's been garnered since they've been here.
And that's where it muddies, because in fact some of my graduate students had finished after I've left the organisation, but I've remained supervisor.
And you can say that.
Yeah.
You know, there are degrees. This looks like a very rigid template, but there are degrees of freedom. Do what you need to do to present your case so that all the information is there.
And I think that prior to my conversation with Judith, I was trying to fit myself into the very rigid box. And then after that, I was like, okay, where can we go then? One thing I just wanted to point out I think this is a UBC unique thing, but I might have even added, I don't know if that's actually what it's called, UBC Thesis examination activities. I don't have the other one. But it's separate from external examination activities that are at the end of the thesis. And the only reason I pointed out is that I know there's a lot of confusion. I've seen a lot of confusion about that. So this is where it would be if you're, part of, because we have the 2 UEs at every dissertation, and so lots of universities don't have that requirement. So. Okay, so I think moving on to the next section. So again, this is so the narrative. So short, I highlighted what area of my research is, as many numbers as I could, highlighted again so I could go back and change them if I needed to make a current version. I put in if there's any really unique things. So I was once invited to be an expert witness at the Canadian Senate. That was very exciting. Okay.
This is horn tooting, but it's really important horn tooting.
And that was hard because I'm a really good Canadian. I apologize for pretty much everything I do, and so it was difficult to write those. But I pushed through.
Before you move on, Jenna, again, I just want to emphasize how important this is that you narrate what you need to about your interests and accomplishments from a research standpoint within this section. And while it looks perhaps crazy to put, I applied for X number of grants, I have a total of X amount of dollars, people will go through your CV and add it up anyways.
That's the thing, they're counting anyway, so you might as well make sure they count right.
Absolutely, and it is impressive to look and go, wow, that's great. So be sure that you narrate that and don't be afraid to put in figures. And if you're early in your career, people aren't expecting gazillions of dollars. They're expecting that you have had the opportunity to put in applications, and we're going to get to this section when it comes to what you're going to show on the CV in terms of applications for funding that have perhaps been approved but not funded, which can also go on.
Mm-hmm. Again, a caution.
Oh, yes.
Which I didn't
If you say you have $1 billion in your narrative, then they better add up in the columns because someone's going to check.
Yes.
Yeah. And it also, if you have a lot of money, you probably want to also be reflecting in your scholarly contributions.
Absolutely.
And the other little item, when it says year, some people assume that's the year you get the award. Well, if you just put in that year, then it means you get that much for that year. So in this case, it's distributed over 216 to 219. That's really important.
Yeah.
That level of clarity is tremendously important, as is, you can see, for example, with Jenna's grant right here, she has, it's 2016 to 2019, and we're looking for sustained productivity. This shows that her research will be sustained over the next 3 years with funding. It also, you'll see, she put herself down and bolded.
That was, yeah. So, and I did that throughout. That was something I saw where any chance you can, highlight your name. And then, again, if people are going to count, then at least they've got the information needs to be counted, making it easy.
And you'll see she's got 2 columns there, primary PI and
Right.
then co-PI.
Yeah.
So those are really important as well, that you're showing where amongst this grant funding
Yeah.
you fit in terms
Because
of
it
your
is obvious, I
contribution.
mean, we know that PI and COI are very, very different beasts, so I think that's, and I've seen that I just was on an adjudication or something, and I saw that quite consistently, where people wouldn't distinguish whether they were PI or COI, and I thought I was surprised, because I thought that was kind of an obvious one that would need to be delineated. Okay.
Well, there's a problem with that though, because on certain kinds of research grants, you have to identify a PI, even though it's a collaborative board.
Yeah.
And there really
Star.
isn't one person standing out above the others. SHRC is, I don't know if there's other, but SHRC is very problematic in that way. It forces you to identify a single PI.
And they all are, all the track council.
Yeah.
Then in that case, I would put a star and highlight
Yeah, very good idea.
there.
Yeah.
There's an asterisk again.
Yeah, an asterisk there, this grant, like, same as your author statement, unless otherwise stated, first author put, did most of the work, so that kind of thing. So I think if that's a typical how you're applying, these grants are collaborative, then that could also maybe be something, I wouldn't put that in this narrative, but maybe if that was a big pattern in your CV in the other section.
Yeah. Make sure you differentiate between competitive and non-competitive.
Yes.
That's critical. And it's also important if you can put in grants that you applied for, that were approved, but were not funded. That can go in these tables, but do not list a ton of grants where you didn't get any money at all because they were rejected, because that doesn't look so hot.
Yeah, you want to be careful, like you want to show that because applying for grants is obviously an onerous undertaking, but if you're not getting, you don't want it to have, you want it to be balanced, between the ones that you were awarded.
Yes.
And we have seen
In that regard, you've applied for a grant, do you indicate anywhere that you're waiting for results, or it just, because I think that if I don't say that I'm waiting for results, some people might think that I got it, but I may not have.
That's a good point. It probably would be.
You can put that in there, but you have to indicate
Yeah,
clearly.
you could put it under the year or
You won't know
something.
until whenever.
Yeah, we'll find out. Because, and especially if you do it chronologically, then that's going to be at the top, so that'll make sense. That you
I would actually recommend you don't put it in this chart, but
in a second.
in a separate one, underneath grants that have been applied for.
We're
and
waiting
you're
to hear about,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, you don't want to mix up
Yeah.
you don't want the person reading it to have to parse it.
Yeah.
Can you just say pending?
Yes,
Yeah.
results pending.
Yeah. So this section, I think is probably where I made the most changes between what the SAC suggested with the template was and what I added. So I added subsections and probably changed wording slightly. And I think that's dependent on your field. So in my field, the conference presentations are all peer reviewed, and that's where we co-author with students a lot, and so they're kind of a big part of my CV. So and I think they're under other presentations because they're not invited. I'm sorry, I'm just scrolling down here. So I actually called it that. I called it what it was instead of, because that actually section wasn't in there, but that was really relevant to me, and I wanted whoever read it to know that these were peer reviewed, to not have any confusion. What are other presentations? If I'd used the wording in the SAC, that information would have been lost.
And that gets really confusing when we're looking at CVs. So not only is it really helpful to do what Jenna did here in terms of separating between international, national, and local, but also between peer-reviewed and invited versus non-peer-reviewed. And the other piece is always underline students.
Yes.
Or find a way to bold students so that they know that you're doing a lot of these presentations if you are.
And
with
that-
students, which is mentorship.
So, and I'll say how important, so one of the, I was just adjudicating for the Killer Mentorship Award, and faculty didn't do that. So, and it was the senior award, so these people are about to retire, so they've got these 60-page CVs, and so I would get to the bottom and be like, well, which of these publications are with students, because that's one of the criteria, and then I have to scroll all the way up to the top to see the students, so then write down the students' names. It was very frustrating, and I have to say, I was like, okay, try and be objective, because they haven't come to talk to Judith and I, this, but it was, but it did frustrate me enough that I was had to be careful to not mark them down. One other thing, in addition to underlining student names, bolding your own name, number. So again, as Lee says, make sure your numbers match your summaries. But I think that, because these are the kinds of things that absolutely get counted, your publications, conference presentations, that's a, they'll get counted and then divided by the number of years you've been in your position. So that's really important. And then this is again where you want that, if you're not the person to identify the little tiny typos, but really go through and make sure every single one of these is in the same format, and your name is the same, like there's no, you don't put a space between your initials. If you don't do it once, don't do it anywhere, kind of thing. So I think that kind of consistency, I don't know, maybe I'm overstating that, but I put some energy into that. Okay, so I'm trying to think if there's anything. Yeah, so I think again, like parsing it, so I have mine split up by international, national, local.
And numbered. Number them,
yeah.
folks, it sounds silly, but people are going to count them anyways.
Yeah.
So make it easier, number them.
Yeah. Okay, so service to the university.
Before you go on to service, can I just jump in? For you folks in the EL stream, when we zipped over the section on teaching, your 8A, just so that you know, you have a full page that you can write there, where it's only 150 words. For anybody else, there's a full page. And then you'll see as you go along, unlike the other CV, there's room for you to talk about sections on educational leadership, curriculum development, etc. And they're right there in the CV, so use those opportunities. And then number 9, there's a whole thing, you can have 2 full pages to discuss educational leadership, 9A. So use those opportunities, because the CV doesn't lend itself well to that for those of you in this particular stream. So make sure you use those opportunities. You're not bound by the 150 words. You have far more room within your CV to make those kinds of cases for yourself.
Yeah. But I still think you should, concise is good too.
Mm-hmm.
So a balance.
Less is more.
Yes, but everything should be there.
Yeah.
So if it's not represented elsewhere, I mean, I think you use it to summarize, and if something that's unique to you or not represented elsewhere. Okay, so section 10, this is the, oh, I'm sorry, I'm jumping down. Oh yeah, here we go, service to the university. Again, the same console narrative. So here, the committee work, committee membership, again, as needed, but based on the complexity of the kinds of things you've done, break it down. I think it recommends by university faculty level anyway, but if there's more things more ways that needs to be broken down, you can. Offices held. I don't know that I had that much to say about that section. Service to the community. I think this is probably that will probably look the most unique for everybody, because it depends on your field so much. So if you're in a really small field, you're going to have lots more opportunities for leadership positions in the field versus you're in a larger field. They're probably, those opportunities don't come along as much. So I think this is probably where you want to really focus on making the CV work for you. And again, long lists, I would figure out ways to summarize them. Editorships was I think there was something, figuring out how to put that in, because they can come in different ways. Is it a special issue or whatnot? So I think might be something to think about.
Going back to that particular piece, the fact that you are being asked to review for scholarly journals is tremendously important, because it speaks to your impact. Same thing when you're asked to be on an editorial board. It speaks to the impact of your work. So these are really important pieces. So make sure that if you're doing them, that you clearly state that you're doing them and how often and for what journals. If, for example, you've been asked to review for the top journal in your field, put an asterisk there, folks, and make sure you indicate that this is the top journal in your field, because that is impressive. There's lots of journals out there asking everybody to participate, but what you want is you want people to know that you have had an impact, that your work is having an impact. And this is one of the ways that we look to see that, in fact, it has.
Great. I'm just trying to, yeah, so I think there wasn't anything new that was particular. The one thing, and I'm not sure I love how I ended up doing it, I was on the CIHR committee that's now, of course, it's a different thing, but it was this quite big event where we were flown to Ottawa, we sat at a 20-person committee, and you know, so I did put, I tried to put some information here, but there are some, like, I wouldn't say that that's the best way I could have documented that, so you know, just to say it's always a work in progress. But so anything like that where you spent a lot more time or there's a bigger commitment then would be, you know, typical of a grant assessment activity, some way to highlight or document it. Now, is there a media place now, or is it still? Because I can't remember. I know I added that way back when. I never.
No, but it is. It's a good thing to put in under service.
If I'd have known cyberbullying would have been something that media wanted to talk about, I probably wouldn't have gone into that field because I don't enjoy that. But I do. So that was way, you know, or I think even when I was going out for associate, that was I had to add that section.
Well, and again, this is service to the university, service to the professional community. So when you do these interviews, when there's stories written that you're communicating about particular issues, you're doing service to the university. So make sure you put them in.
I have a question. What if you are in a position where you're consulted on an ongoing basis, and people think you're doing something that's different, special, they consult you from different universities or even from within the university, they're conducting research projects, they want to find out what you're doing. Where would you put that? I mean,
okay, under section 11, number H, and you don't have to have every one of these sections, but 11 is service to the community, and you'll see down number H is consultant.
Yeah.
So you can indicate it there. Just be clear on what the nature of the consultation is.
And I think that's tricky.
It is.
If the consultation is 2 hours on something very specific, but you're doing it 20 times a year, then it adds up, right? And how do you capture it without people getting annoyed that you're writing this thing?
Well, that might be like what I did for the teaching, where you talk. I was consulted on this topic X number of times over this period of time, instead of listing each one.
Thank you.
Questions, anybody on this part? Okay.
I think the only thing about the awards that I wrote down that I want to mention is that nominations count, and that's actually Judith's feedback to me, because that was empty when I was putting that section was empty, and she said, you know, you should see if you can get nominated for an award, and so that's actually, I won the award, which is actually even better, but I never even would have, I mean, two comments, I never would have even thought to kind of figure out how to get nominated, or you know, if she hadn't suggested that, because it, you know, wouldn't have been on my radar, I wouldn't have thought that was something. So apply for awards or talk about getting, and it was embarrassing. I think Lee, I wrote a very awkward email to Lee. Judith said I should look to get nominated for something, and this looks like it might be up my alley. Can you nominate me? And you know, I'm really laying it on the table here, and it was, you know, I kind of like, okay, send that. And it worked out really well, so I think don't hesitate if there's something. I don't think we're very good in the faculty, and we're talking about it at the Dean's Advisory Committee on Research, about how to be better at that, how to be more proactive in identifying people to nominate. But one of the pieces the second piece was that just nominating, I could have listed that here. So, which I did to submit, and then it got changed with one of the addendums. Yeah.
Well, and you may have been nominated for a teaching award a couple of times, but you didn't get it. the fact that you were nominated a couple of times speaks to the quality of your teaching. So those are the sorts of bits of information that can be very helpful. We're not going to win every award that we're nominated for, but it's really, it tells us something about the fact that people are going out of their way to nominate you.
So then, and then just this other, section, and again, I don't know where it is. Oh, there we go. Okay. Really just a one page. I actually think mine's probably a little bit long in retrospect. Maybe not for promotion, but for anything else I would do if I was submitting an annotated version of my CV, I'd probably streamline it a bit. But I think for promotion, it probably is worth it to have things just spelled out a little bit more. Oh, I'm seeing here. I did put that here. That 20-person that explained that review experience. That was a little bit more than just looking at some documents.
I think it's really important to point out that those narratives at the top of those sections and this kind of summary piece provide coherence, because the rest of it is a list.
Yes.
So many things are listed and people can't see the relationships. So if you want to point out, for instance, there's two main streams to your work, or that your two areas of emphasis overlap, or so that when people are reading the things in the list, they can bring coherence to it. I think those narratives and those summary pieces are really important to provide that.
And I think there's two pieces to that. That's why it's really good to speak it to somebody else before you write it, because there will be gaps. You're going from A to C and you're missing B for the average person. So that's really important. The other thing, just to reinforce what you're saying, Anthony, is I went over a CV not that long ago, and I still, by the time I finished looking at these sections, didn't understand what the person was doing and how it all held together. So this individual then worked very much on number 13 and weaved together the narrative of her career and her research. And after I read that, I thought, oh, now that makes sense. So it's really important. You may understand it. Assume you're speaking to a lay person. They will be scholars, but they'll be coming from other disciplines, and they will not know. So you need to teach them as you go.
Just moving on to the publication. So I didn't even have an author statement before in my previous version, my previous CV line. And so I think and once I put that in, it really, again, it provided that framework. So it really was, I was able to really kind of describe how does authorship work in my field.
This is really important. First of all, I need to let the EL folks know, you do not even have to include this section in your CV. Publications are not required for promotion in the EL stream. So if you have them, that's great, but do not assume that they're necessary. All right, this section is not required in the EL stream. So let's just put that there on the side. The other thing is I want to emphasize how important this legend is. It is extremely helpful for people coming from a multitude of disciplines to know what the norms are in your particular discipline, the authorship norms. It's important to know that you're publishing with students and to indicate by underlining or asterisking the publications with students. It is really important to know what the top journals are. If there are 2 or 3 top journals in your field and you're publishing in them, put them in your legend, because people will not know otherwise. So that legend can be, 5, 6, 7, 10 lines, but it's going to provide context that people will not have if they're not in your particular discipline.
Yes. And then the other piece, and what we were alluding to when Judith was talking earlier, is really this idea of you can have a separate page for journal descriptions, but again, and they're looking at these online, so they've got to come out of this and go into a different screen and come back and interpret it in terms of this. But you can put it right in here, and then all the information is right there. So I did 2 things. I put the impact factor, and then I starred ones that were in the top 10%. I don't know if that was your suggestion or if I saw that somewhere, but so included that for as much as possible. Again, format, one formatting style.
Multiple authored
Number-
publications.
What's that?
Multiple authored publications. Making sure underneath the publication,
Oh,
you indicate your relative contribution.
yeah, I didn't do that.
I know.
There you go, add that. Highly recommend it.
It really helps because if you're authoring with a number of people, then what was your contribution to that? And you can say it was 20% doing such and such. You can say that in a two-authored publication it was equal contribution, and that can go right under the actual citation.
You know why I didn't do that? So I put a statement that contribution, order is relative to contribution, but also if you look through in my, and I should have actually gone back and put that here, that the norm is collaborative,
Yes.
is multi-authored. Like I have very few, and only early in the career before I knew anyone, that were single authored, because I prioritized having students and colleagues and whatnot. Yeah.
I just wondered if in different fields, like maybe psychology, it's more common to put the impact factor.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
But is it requested?
It can be very helpful, but if you're publishing in a field where the journals are really quite specialized and don't have a high impact, you're better off not to put that in than to put them in.
But I would include that
Yes.
in that note. to
In
explain,
your legend,
this
explain
is
it.
I'm dealing with low incidences disability, so this isn't,
This is a new field. And
a new field, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, explain that, yeah.
The other thing is, I mean, obviously, and you put it in there, Jenna, there are some areas where multiple authorship is seen as a good thing.
Absolutely.
Others where a lack of individual or first authorships would be seen as a weakness.
Yeah.
So be careful about that, because
I've
I've seen review processes where people were identified as weak because they only had 2 single authored publications.
Right, and so I tried to address that by saying, any thesis work that's published is
So you haven't mentioned the APA.
no, well, I don't think you have to be bound by APA. I think you have to pick a style and stick to it,
Yes.
but I don't know if it has to
Exactly
be
right.
APA.
By the way, you have an error.
We would find it.
Where?
There's an underscore. He fumbled it now.
You see,
Oh, okay, but that's
see after
that's
in-
new.
So there are more than just 2 OCD people in the
I
world.
haven't submitted it for anything. I have to say, I have this kind of sense, who's going to see this now? Like, I hope we still have
I have to
opportunities.
go, but I want to ask a question about authorship and impact factors. So I've been told that my research is, it's very slow to get into journals, but there's also movement in Indigenous health research that you have to get your stuff out because the field needs it. So you may have to kind of compromise impact factor in order to get the social impact. So how would you make a statement that certain publications are designed for social impact and others are for the journal impact factors in?
I think it's the same kind of thing, that you're needing to publish in specialized journals.
Yeah.
And that tend to have lower impact factors.
And there's 2 things you can do about that. You can put it in your legend in a very brief way. You can make sure the head knows as well, so that
put
the
it
head
in
can
the
put it
head's
in the
letter.
head's
Yeah.
letter. And that happens for a number of different types of real discipline-specific specialty areas where you're not going to have the profile that some of the other folks have because this is just, it's not there yet in terms of the discipline. Or it's geographically situated research where there are not a lot of high-impact journals.
Yeah.
So that's really important to make sure you put that in briefly, but that the head knows that as well, so that he or she can make sure that's in their letter.
I just feel that this is kind of a stressful meeting. Next time we have it, we need to have martinis.
You should. We should have put that at the beginning. Don't even think about doing your CV until you've had at least 1 martini, maybe 2.
The first draft. You want the last draft when you're finding the typos to be sober.
In the interest of reducing anxiety for those people who are thinking about tenure, what percentage of people do not get tenure at UBC?
It's very small.
Tiny.
It is small. It is indeed small. And so you don't want to get too panicked about this, but what you want to do is understand that this is where you have control.
Yeah.
You don't have control over anything else. for how you present your case. And if you go back to the criteria and remember those words, sustained, productive, scholarly activity, educational leadership, which has to do with capacity building, like use those words in your narrative. Because that's what we're looking for, and we're looking for input, and we're looking for output. So just remember those and use them to massage and present your own case, which we're often really lousy at doing. But you need to do it, because no one's going to know your case better than you do.
And the process is much more humane than it used to be. It used to be that you would submit your case, that the SPC would do something. You wouldn't hear about it unless it was just get the hell out of here. The Dean's Committee would do something, you wouldn't hear about it. The Senior Appointments Committee would do something, you wouldn't hear about it.
I know, it's just a
until
vacuum.
the President in June. Well, now we're required at every level to inform you what's happening.
And-
Much more humane.
And I'm going to toot Lee's horns. You can do that in a really positive way, where we're always peppered like, just so you know, you should have, and then it was like, you should have a drink now, or go celebrate. Was it? Yeah, it wasn't a drink. Go celebrate. But they're very lovely emails to get peppered throughout the year.
I want to go back to the, just one sec, while I think about it, because it could go out the other side quickly. In terms of the order of what you put for your pubs, if, for example, you want to put your books first, if you've done a couple books that you think are particularly important, they can go to the top. It doesn't have to be refereed publications first. So if there are particular pieces of work that you think really do highlight your case, put those first. The ordering is not important there. What is important is that do not mix non-refereed with refereed. Do not put things like a book review in a journal as part of your refereed publications. I have to tell you, people will say, if it looks like a rat, it smells like a rat, it's a rat. And they'll look for those things. So you want to be really clean in the way in which you put things forward. The other thing, in case we don't have too much time at the end, the sections on works submitted and work in progress is critical. Do not ignore that, because it's your pipeline. Everybody wants to know that when you get this promotion or when you get tenure, that you still have a plan to keep working. And that your research trajectory is just taking off, not about to come to a grinding halt because you got the golden ring because you got tenure. And they will look at that very, very carefully, and that your referees will look at that, SAC will look at that, and it will be viewed at each level. So please take that seriously.
And I didn't until you said that. You told me, I was like, really? But that just looks like padding then, or like you can make that up. Sure, I'm working on this. But I did go through and you can see I put in evidence of where these are coming through. So they're actually, this, I say a couple of these, I'm like, oh, we never looked through on that. The other thing, there's some of it, but I think it does.
It's important.
You comment, I have to say, I heard quite feedback on that section, which I was kind of like, well, what is it worth? But it really did seem to matter.
The other piece is, because we're talking input and output, and it's great to get money, but we want knowledge translation. If you are putting your citations down, you can also say, this one comes off of this grant. Or this one and this one and this one comes off of this grant. And that's very helpful information. It's like, okay, they're not just putting stuff out there that's kind of mindless. It really is input, output. You're seeing very clearly that the money comes in, the research is being done, it's being translated. Okay? So that can go in there. Yes.
Going back to the impact factors, one of the challenges that I've got is that really the ones for my area are not high impact. So someone has actually suggested to me tracking through and using a rationale for either academia or ResearchGate, so that you can actually use those and the metrics that come over those as a way to actually track and actually put some of that down. So it's not just the impact factor that's promoted that way.
Joanne Nasland in the library is very good at listing, finding out where the journal has been abstracted, has been listed, has been cited. And that's a pretty good indication.
That would probably be a pretty cool thing to add for your note on authorship, just like your research, all the H index and different indexes you can. Because the one thing that was clear to me too, whoever looked at this, they Googled my name right away. They were looking at my Google Scholar, they were looking at ResearchGate, like I'm like, how do you know? Oh, okay. And you know, anyone I saw, that's another piece of advice I would give, is that to have other senior faculty look at it, and I certainly had a couple, but that is something that I think people are automatically doing, so again, why not put that in here?
Just don't make it so detailed that we lose sight of the actual citations in the work themselves.
Right, the authorship note.
It is as important to make sure that the citation is complete as it is to have all this other information. But if you assume that somebody wants to know, okay, so what does this mean in terms of the journal, and what does this mean in terms of your role in the contribution to this? How does this fit in terms of your research trajectory? Those are the pieces that are really important. And that and the order of authorship, really, really important. Because in the sciences, last author is primary author. Whereas for us, it's first author. So, Anthony.
So just no page numbers for the journal articles here, and some style guides.
Those are
those
separate, they haven't been
are
published yet. I do have.
Oh, they're always
Yeah,
okay,
sorry,
yeah,
sorry.
okay, yeah. Good.
Those are
They're
freshies.
impressed. Yes.
I know that in the education leadership stream, you don't need to do this section, but I think, I was wondering, how do you also show that you are, like the work in progress or the work submitted, that the same kind of thing, like that things aren't just gonna stop? So is there a
Well,
place
and
for
you
that
may
somewhere
well
else?
want to use those sections. Just take the other pieces out that don't fit.
Okay.
Okay? This can be adapted.
It's just funny it would be under research, so I wasn't sure where you
Yeah.
would put it. I mean, you don't have to answer that now, but just something to think about, because you want to indicate that you're,
Yeah.
okay, I'm gonna keep doing all this, and there's
Yeah.
not
Yes.
any.
And again, you've got that page at the end, that full page, plus you've got 2 pages in your educational leadership area where you can speak to those things.
Yeah, maybe it's more about putting that in the narrative, making sure where it's, for this it's here, but there it's staying on the list.
Any other questions?
Quick question,
Yes.
maybe this varies by field too, but I'm wondering under the works submitted and works in progress sections, I guess I've heard it's bad form to put the name of the journal before it's been accepted because you don't want to give away the, I don't know, blind review process or, the embarrassment.
Put it in.
Potentially,
Yeah.
Put it in.
I didn't know that.
And you know what it speaks to? What it does is it speaks to aiming high.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And it's actually a good thing. Okay, you're going to start with the top journal, and maybe you'll get rejected because they reject 95%. That's fine. Then, you're at least trying to target.
You're comfortable with rejection, that's
Any other questions?
Just a question about the educational leadership not required to have publications or research. But there is the thing about the scholarship of teaching and learning, which does
yes.
lead to publications. And
Yes.
so I think that we want to encourage people in the educational leadership stream to do publishing for teachers, for example, for publishing chapters in books that are trade books for
Absolutely.
textbooks and things. So I don't want to play that down. I think it's important that the scholarship of teaching and learning is still unclear. I think we're still trying to work out what that looks like, and we don't want to use the word research, but some people in the education leadership stream do research, and they do publish, so.
They do, and I think what they're trying to do is parse out here with this CV the fact that there are people, for example, who have SHRC grants that were in the assistant professor stream doing research, and they transferred over. They still have those grants, they have those publications, but the reality is that they are not going to be judged in terms of promotion and tenure based on that piece, because that research piece isn't there. But scholarship of teaching and scholarship of educational leadership are very much a part of the criteria for this stream. And they can be evidenced with publications, book chapters, etc. It's just really what I think they're trying to do is make sure that the folks in the EL stream don't feel they have to do that work, and that if they're carrying on, and I remember doing a workshop with Anna Kindler, and someone said, I got a SHRC grant, and I've transferred over to this stream. What's going to happen to my grant? Can't I work on it? And the answer was you can, but at your own peril. because it's not what you're going to be judged for. You're going to be judged based on these criteria. So that's where you need to be putting your energies.
Shauna, just on, in that note, you could put like publications record and then as evidence of teaching, scholarship of teaching.
Okay, my last point is it is so helpful to have somebody go over your CV when you're ready to go forward. I can't do that for everyone in the Faculty of Education, nor can Jenna and I collectively do that. But the survey that we just did of the tenured folks in the faculty, several of them offered to participate in reviewing CVs. So there will be, I'm going to try and build some capacity here. Heads are great at giving you feedback, and they can give you really detailed feedback, rightly. And that can be very, very useful, but it's also useful maybe even before it goes to the head or after the head. You get a chance to have more eyes on it, because the more eyes that you have on it, you want to be solid. You want to get to the place that Jenna got to, where she said, you know what, I'm proud of my accomplishments and what this speaks to in terms of presenting my case. That's what you want to do. Being clear of what level you're at, what the expectations are at that level, but that's where you want it to be. And if you need to get feedback, then seek feedback, because it can be very helpful.
TSPCs will also
Yes.
look at CVs.
Yes. Yes. The other thing is, for those of you who are not OCD, like I am, don't let this slip. Every time you get something, this should be a living document. It should always be on your desktop. And every time you do a presentation, every time you get a publication, every time you get an invitation, put it down. Because if you just throw everything into a drawer and then you have to pull all this stuff out, it's like doing your taxes when you haven't put all your paperwork together. It will make you insane. And this is a stressful enough process in terms of trying to present your case, that you want to make it as streamlined as possible. And if you keep this up, it also makes it so much easier to do your summary of activities each year, because the stuff is all there. You just cut and paste, cut and paste. So it is actually a very useful document, but it should be on your desktop.
And actually, what I do, I left the highlights in, but the other thing I do often, if I don't have a chance to, or I'm not ready to sit down and write out find that title of that conference presentation, I'll put a note, put SRCD, and I highlight it in yellow. So that's my, and then when there's enough of them, I'm like, all right, the drawer's getting full, sit down and do them.
I have a silly question about initials. So,
I didn't know.
do we submit a paper copy that's signed, like with initials?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
this is an electronic initials. I submitted. I always saw that on there and had no idea what that was for. And then it's like, you have an initial this. I'm like, well, but it's an electronic copy. So I actually made an electronic copy, put it in, and sent it again. So I think it's supposed to denote that this is
Signed off.
You
Yes,
signed
signed
off
off
on
on
it.
it.
Okay, sorry. I'm a digital person.
Yes, so you should
I thought it
sign
was
it.
Can't put my
initials on
email.
the thing, and I kept on asking why would they need them if they have no full name.
Well, that's what I put my initials in there, like JDS, and that's what,
That's what I meant.
No, it needs to be signed. Your supplements also need to be signed. So if you put supplements forward, sign and date them.
Yeah, so get a good copy of your initials. That's not really not a very good one, but get it.
Are we on time even?
Right on time.
So great, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.